The first time I saw humans in battle, I thought they were broken. My name is Vextara, and I am a Kytherian warrior of the third caste. For 300 cycles, I have served the Galactic Defense Coalition, fighting alongside dozens of species against the void swarm that threatens to consume our galaxy. I have witnessed the methodical precision of the crystalline hives, the explosive fury of the magma lords, and the cold calculation of the synthetic collective. Each species brings their own strengths to the endless war, their own way of dealing death to the creatures that hunger for all sentient life. But humans? Humans were different from the moment they joined our ranks. The day everything changed began like any other aboard the battlecruiser Eternal Vigilance. Our mixed-species crew was preparing for what intelligence suggested would be a routine void swarm elimination mission. The scanner arrays had detected a small cluster of swarm vessels feeding on the remains of an uninhabited system, turning asteroids and debris into more of their hungry mass. Standard protocol called for a swift strike to prevent them from growing stronger. I was in the armory, checking my plasma rifle's energy cells, when a new human contingent boarded our ship. I had heard stories about them, of course. They were the newest species to join the coalition, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. Most of the older races viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. They were young, inexperienced, and their technology was considered primitive compared to our millennium-old designs. The airlock hissed open, and they walked in. 24 humans, all wearing their strange black and gray uniforms with minimal armor plating. Their weapons looked crude compared to our elegant energy weapons, projectile firearms that seemed more suited to hunting small prey than fighting the cosmic horror of the Void Swarm. Their leader, a female with short brown hair and scars across her left cheek, approached our captain with a crisp salute. "Captain Martinez reporting for duty, sir," she said to Captain Thekmore, a towering Grorvanian with 4 arms and crystalline hide. "First Human Expeditionary Force is ready for deployment." Captain Thekmore's mandibles clicked in what passed for approval among his species. "Welcome aboard, Captain Martinez. I trust your species is prepared for what they will face. The Void Swarm shows no mercy to inexperience." The human captain's eyes, those strange, forward-facing predator eyes, remained steady. "We're prepared, sir. My people don't back down from a fight." I found myself studying them more closely. They were smaller than most coalition species, bipedal like the Kytherians, but without our natural armor plating. Their skin was soft, vulnerable-looking, and they seemed to rely entirely on their equipment for protection. Yet there was something in their posture, something in the way they held themselves, that suggested they weren't afraid. As we prepared for the jump to hyperspace, I found myself assigned to the same deployment shuttle as half of the human contingent. Military protocol demanded mixed-species units to improve tactical flexibility, though privately I worried about babysitting the newcomers during their first real engagement. The jump to the target system took 6 hours. During that time, I observed the humans carefully. They were chatty. While most coalition species maintained professional silence or engaged in tactical discussions, the humans talked constantly. They shared stories about their homeworld, complained about the recycled air, and made jokes I didn't understand. One of them, a dark-skinned male named Rodriguez, actually laughed when he saw my secondary arms. "For arms, huh?" he said with a grin. "Bet your hell at multitasking." His casual attitude toward my physiology surprised me. Most species either showed respectful distance or scientific curiosity when encountering Kytherians for the first time. Humans seem to treat differences as barely worth noting. "I am more efficient in combat than bipedal species," I replied, uncertain whether he was mocking me. "Oh, I bet. Bet you could probably take down 2 swarm drones while loading a new power cell at the same time." His tone was admiring rather than derisive. "That's going to come in handy out there." Their casualness began to unnerve me. Did they not understand what they were about to face? The Void Swarm was not some primitive enemy that could be defeated with enthusiasm and projectile weapons. Each swarm entity was a perfect killing machine, evolved over eons of devouring entire civilizations. They felt no pain, showed no fear, and adapted to overcome any threat. Entire star systems had been consumed in the time it took for coalition forces to mount effective resistance. When we dropped out of hyperspace, the tactical displays immediately lit up with hostile contacts. The intelligence had been wrong. This wasn't a small feeding cluster. It was a full swarm tendril, dozens of bioships ranging from frigate-sized hunters to massive capital-class devourers. They had detected our arrival and were already moving to intercept. All hands to battle stations. Captain Theckmore's voice echoed through the ship. This is not a drill. Prepare for immediate combat deployment. The hangar bay erupted into controlled chaos as hundreds of coalition fighters prepared for launch. I strapped myself into my assault pod, running through final weapon checks as the launch catapults charged. Around me, other coalition warriors did the same. Gravanian shock troops checking their gravity hammers, synthetic units running diagnostic cycles, crystalline warriors synchronizing their hive mind battlefield network. And the humans? They were singing. Not all of them, and not loudly, but I could hear it over the comm channel. A low, rhythmic chant in their native language. When I asked my pod translation system to interpret, it came back as something called a war song, an ancient human tradition meant to boost morale before battle. Asterisks were the ones who will never break. We are the ones who will never yield. Blood and pain are ours to take. Steel and flame our only shield. Asterisk, the singing sent an odd chill through my nervous system. There was something primal about it, something that spoke to instincts buried deep in my genetic memory. For a moment, I almost believed they might actually be warriors rather than technologically primitive newcomers. Then, the launch order came, and we were hurled into the void. The battle began exactly as coalition doctrine dictated. Our fighters formed into coordinated attack formations, using superior technology and established tactics to engage the swarm entities at optimal range. Plasma beams and quantum missiles lit up the darkness as we executed precise strikes against the alien bioships. The humans, however, immediately broke formation. I watched in horror as their crude fighters accelerated far beyond safe limits, diving straight into the heart of the swarm formation. Their projectile weapons chattered constantly, spitting streams of metal projectiles that seemed laughably inadequate against the hardened carapaces of swarm hunters. Within minutes, 3 of their fighters had taken critical damage. Human squadron returned to formation immediately. Came the order from flight control. You are endangering the tactical plan. Captain Martinez's voice crackled back over the comm. Negative control. My people know what they're doing. What they were doing appeared to be suicide. I watched one of their fighters, Rodriguez, according to the IFF signal, take a direct hit from a swarm biocannon. The blast should have vaporized his entire craft. Instead, his fighter tumbled, smoking and sparking, but somehow still intact. And still firing. Holy hell, these things are tough. His voice came through the comm, strained but not panicked. Maria, you got my 6? My starboard engine's making some very unhappy noises. I got you, Rico. Jenkins, light up that hunter coming around from below. Copy that. Fox 3. Target painted. Their communication style was nothing like proper coalition battle protocol. They used nicknames, informal language, and seemed to treat the engagement like some kind of sporting event. Yet somehow, impossibly, they were holding their own against swarm entities that had destroyed veteran coalition squadrons. I found myself flying closer to observe their tactics. What I saw defied everything I understood about space combat, where coalition fighters relied on standoff weapons and calculated maneuvers. Humans got close. Dangerously close. They used their fighters like clubs, ramming damaged swarm entities, and using the impact to line up point-blank shots with their primitive kinetic weapons. When their ammunition ran low, they improvised. One pilot actually jettisoned his emergency fuel pods and detonated them manually to take out a hunter that had gotten behind his wingman. But it was when the first human pilot died that I truly began to understand what I was witnessing. Lieutenant Chin's fighter took 3 direct hits while protecting a damaged crystalline interceptor. Her craft broke apart in a brief flash of light and escaping atmosphere. For exactly 2.3 seconds, the human comm channel went silent. Then someone, I think it was Rodriguez, spoke in a voice I had never heard from any coalition species. It was low, controlled, and filled with something that made my instincts scream warnings. They killed Chun. Copy that, came Martinez's reply in the same tone. All human units, switch to Protocol 7. I had no idea what Protocol 7 meant, but the change in the humans was immediately visible. Their already aggressive tactics became something else entirely. They stopped treating the engagement like a battle and began treating it like an extermination. Rodriguez, flying his damaged fighter on one engine, somehow managed to get behind a swarm hunter twice the size of his craft. Instead of using his remaining missiles, he accelerated to ramming speed. At the last second, he ejected, not to escape, but to manually detonate his ship's reactor core inside the swarm entity's digestive cavity. The explosion tore the creature apart from the inside. Other human pilots began using similar tactics. They would coordinate to trap swarm entities. Then, one pilot would sacrifice their fighter to ensure a kill while their wingmen extracted maximum damage from the opportunity. It wasn't suicide. It was calculated sacrifice in service of a larger goal. But what truly shocked me was what happened next. Rodriguez had survived his ejection, floating in space in just his emergency suit while swarm hunters converged on his position. According to all Coalition protocol, he should have been written off as a combat loss. Space suits have no weapons, no propulsion capable of tactical maneuvers, and no protection against swarm bioweapons. The humans ignored protocol. Maria, give me a pickup vector on Rico. Are you insane? There's 6 hunters between you and him. I don't care if there's 60. Nobody gets left behind. What followed was the most reckless rescue operation I had ever witnessed. 4 human fighters, already damaged and low on ammunition, carve a corridor through swarm entities to reach their ejected comrade. They took horrific damage in the process. One pilot lost his entire port wing, another had his cockpit breached, and was flying in vacuum with just his emergency mask. But they got him. They pulled Rodriguez aboard the rescue fighter and continued the engagement as if nothing had happened. The pilot with the breached cockpit was actually joking over the comm about the cold while continuing to engage targets. It was at that moment I realized the humans weren't broken. They were terrifying. Over the course of the 6-hour battle, I watched them display a level of commitment that bordered on madness. When conventional tactics failed, they adapted instantly. When their weapons proved inadequate, they improvised. When their comrades were threatened, they responded with a fury that seemed to genuinely surprise the swarm entities. The Void Swarm had evolved to fight predictable enemies, creatures that followed logical survival patterns, that retreated when damaged, that prioritized self-preservation over tactical objectives. They had never encountered a species that treated death as just another tool to be used strategically. By the time the last swarm entity was destroyed, the human squadron had lost 8 of their 24 fighters. In any other coalition unit, such losses would have meant mission failure and traumatic psychological impact on survivors. The humans were already discussing tactical improvements for the next engagement. As our forces regrouped and began the return journey, I found myself seeking out Captain Martinez in the ship's observation deck. She was standing alone, looking out at the debris field where we had fought, her scarred face impassive. "I have to ask," I said, approaching carefully. "Your people fight like they have nothing to lose. Do humans not fear death?" She turned to look at me with those predator eyes, and for a moment I saw something in them that made my combat instincts fire warning signals. "We fear plenty of things," she said quietly. "We fear letting our friends down. We fear failing in our duty. We fear losing the people we care about." She paused, looking back at the stars. "But death? Death is just the price of doing what's right. And we've always been willing to pay it. That level of sacrifice seems extreme. Is it a religious belief?" Martinez actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Religion, evolution, culture, take your pick. Humans have been fighting losing battles for causes greater than themselves since before we had language. It's just who we are. She started to walk away, then stopped and looked back at me. But you asked the wrong question, Vexthara. You asked if we fear death. What you should have asked is what happens when we get angry. And what has happened? The smile she gave me was not reassuring. You'll find out soon enough. The swarm just killed 8 of my people. And humans have very, very long memories when it comes to revenge. As I watched her walk away, I realized that everything I thought I knew about warfare was about to change. The humans hadn't just survived their first engagement with the Void Swarm. They had enjoyed it. And that terrified me more than any cosmic horror ever could. The memorial service for the 8 fallen human pilots was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in 3 centuries of military service. Coalition funeral rites are typically solemn affairs focused on honoring the dead and comforting the living. The Grorvanian death songs speak of returning to the crystal caves of their homeworld. Crystalline hives perform elaborate harmonic compositions that integrate the deceased's memories into the collective consciousness. Synthetic units hold logical assessments of the individual's contributions to the greater computational matrix. Human funeral rites, apparently, involved alcohol and storytelling. So there I was, Rodriguez was saying, his words slightly slurred from whatever potent beverage the humans had synthesized from ship's rations, hanging in space in my emergency suit, watching 6 swarm hunters closing in on me. And what's the first thing I think? Not, oh God, I'm gonna die. Not, this is it for Rodriguez. No, the first thing I think is Chin's gonna be so pissed if I don't make it back to finish our poker game. Laughter echoed through the recreation deck where the humans had gathered. Not the polite, respectful chuckles that other species might offer during remembrance ceremonies, but genuine, raucous amusement. They were laughing while mourning their dead comrades, and somehow it didn't seem disrespectful. It seemed human. I had been invited to attend by Captain Martinez, who claimed it was important for coalition allies to understand human military culture. What I was witnessing challenged every assumption I had about grief, loss, and military morale. Chen always was competitive about cards, another pilot added. Remember that time on Luna Station when she cleaned out half the Marine garrison? The security footage of those jarheads trying to figure out how they got hustled by a 5'0" fighter pilot is still comedy gold. More laughter, more stories. Each tale seemed designed to embarrass or honor the deceased in equal measure. They spoke of Lieutenant Chen's tendency to sing off-key during long patrol runs, of her collection of ancient Earth music that she forced everyone to listen to, of her ability to jury-rig fighter systems in ways that violated every safety protocol, but somehow always worked. They weren't mourning her death. They were celebrating her life. The thing about Chun, Captain Martinez said, her voice carrying easily across the assembled humans, was that she never met a rule she couldn't improve by breaking it. Remember the Proxima incident? Collective groaning arose from the group. Oh, come on. Martinez continued, grinning. It worked, didn't it? Tell me one other pilot who could have taken out that swarm scout by hiding inside an asteroid field and using mining charges as impromptu missiles. The court-martial board wasn't impressed, someone called out. The court-martial board can kiss my exhaust trail. Chun saved 3 colony ships with that stunt. The fact that it technically violated 17 different regulations just proves that our regulations need updating. As the night progressed, I began to understand that this wasn't just a memorial service. It was a tactical briefing disguised as storytelling. Each anecdote revealed something about human combat philosophy, their approach to problem-solving, their willingness to improvise when standard protocols failed. More importantly, I began to sense something building among them. The laughter and stories were genuine, but underneath lay a current of cold anger that grew stronger with each shared memory of their fallen comrades. They were good people, Rodriguez said eventually, his voice sobering. All 8 of them. They came out here to make a difference, to protect folks they'd never met from something that wanted to eat the whole damn galaxy. And the swarm killed them for it, added Pilot Jackson, a pale woman with cybernetic implants over her left eye. Turned them into spare parts for its hunger. The mood in the room shifted. The laughter faded. replaced by something much more dangerous. "So what do we do about it?" asked Martinez quietly. The response was immediate and unanimous. "We make them pay." But it was the way they said it that sent warning signals through my nervous system. Not the hot rage of young warriors seeking glory, not the calculated aggression of veteran soldiers following orders. This was something colder, more methodical. The humans weren't just angry about losing their comrades. They were planning something. Over the following weeks, as the Eternal Vigilance continued its patrol route through contested space, I watched the humans prepare for their next encounter with the Void Swarm. What I observed was unlike any military preparation I had ever seen. Most coalition species approach combat through systematic training, equipment maintenance, and tactical rehearsal. Proven methods refined over centuries of warfare. The humans did all of these things, but they also did something else. They innovated. I found Rodriguez in one of the auxiliary workshops, surrounded by disassembled fighter components and what appeared to be improvised explosive devices. When I asked what he was working on, his scarred face lit up with enthusiasm. "Swarm entities are tough, right?" he said, hefting a device that looked like a conventional plasma grenade with additional components welded to its housing. "Their bioarmor can shrug off most standard weapons, but they're still organic. They still have nervous systems, still have vital organs." He activated a holographic display showing detailed scans of swarm anatomy. "So, I've been thinking, what if instead of trying to blast through their armor, we get the explosives inside? These little beauties are modified plasma charges with delayed dispersal neurotoxin payloads." The implications hit me immediately. You're creating biological weapons. Technically, chemical weapons. The toxins are synthetic compounds designed to target swarm neurochemistry specifically. Completely harmless to coalition species, but devastating to swarm entities. He paused, studying my expression. "Does that bother you?" It did, but not for the reasons he might expect. Coalition military doctrine had strict prohibitions against biological and chemical warfare, rules established after several species had nearly exterminated themselves in ancient conflicts. But the Void Swarm wasn't a civilization to be defeated. It was a cosmic plague to be eradicated. "It's against established protocols," I said carefully. Rodriguez shrugged. "So was ramming a fighter into a hunter's digestive cavity, but that worked pretty well. Sometimes you need to break the rules to get the job done." This casual disregard for established military doctrine was becoming a pattern with the humans. They studied coalition protocols not to follow them, but to understand their limitations and find ways around them. In the ship's computer core, I discovered Pilot Jackson working with the synthetic units to develop new tactical algorithms. But instead of improving existing combat programs, she was teaching them to think chaotically. "Predictability is death against the swarm," she explained as lines of code scrolled across her display. "They adapt to patterns, learn to counter systematic approaches. So we're developing anti-pattern algorithms, tactical subroutines that deliberately incorporate random variables and contradictory decisions." The synthetic unit beside her, designation XN 7742, processed this with obvious confusion. Random variables reduce tactical efficiency by 23.7%, according to baseline projections. "Efficiency isn't everything," Jackson replied. "Effectiveness is. I'd rather hit them with something they can't predict than something that's theoretically optimal." She pulled up combat footage from their previous engagement, showing human fighters executing maneuvers that defied conventional tactical wisdom. "Look at this sequence. Rodriguez's ramming attack had a survival probability of less than 4%. Any sane tactical computer would have vetoed it. But it worked because the swarm didn't expect it. You are suggesting that a logical behavior can be tactically superior to logical behavior? I'm suggesting that when you're fighting an enemy that learns from every encounter, being unpredictable is more valuable than being efficient." This exchange disturbed me more than the weapons modifications. The humans weren't just breaking rules. They were rejecting the fundamental principles of organized warfare. They were embracing chaos as a weapon. 3 weeks later, we received a priority distress signal from the Kepler Research Station, a joint coalition facility conducting deep space xenobiology studies. The message was fragmentary, filled with static and interference, but the key details were clear: void swarm attack, heavy casualties, immediate evacuation required. The Eternal Vigilance altered course immediately, but long-range sensors revealed the grim situation. A massive swarm tendril had emerged from hyperspace near the research station, deploying dozens of bioships in a coordinated assault. By the time we arrived, the station's defensive platforms had been overwhelmed, and several sections showed signs of swarm infestation. Captain Thekmore called for an immediate strategy meeting. The situation was grim. The research station housed over 3,000 coalition personnel from a dozen different species, including irreplaceable scientific data on swarm biology. But the enemy force was substantial, and standard rescue protocols called for careful planning to minimize casualties. The humans, predictably, had other ideas. "We go in now," Captain Martinez said bluntly as soon as the tactical briefing began. "Every minute we wait, more people die, and the swarm gets stronger, feeding on the station's resources. Immediate assault would be tactically unsound," Captain Thekmore replied, his crystalline hide shifting to warning colors. "The enemy has numerical superiority and defensive positioning. Proper planning requires at least 6 hours to coordinate. In 6 hours, there won't be anyone left to rescue," Martinez interrupted. "The swarm doesn't take prisoners. It takes biomass." The other coalition commanders shifted uncomfortably. What Martinez was proposing violated every principle of military planning, but her words carried the weight of experience. The humans had faced the swarm before and survived. "What are you suggesting?" asked Commander Veltar, the Crystalline Hive liaison. Martinez activated the tactical display, highlighting key points on the station schematic. "Three-pronged assault. My people take point with close support fighters. Punch a hole in their perimeter here." She indicated a section where swarm bioships were clustered around the station's main docking bay. Coalition heavy fighters provide covering fire and handle their capital ships. Rescue shuttles follow behind us and extract as many survivors as possible. "The casualties would be enormous," Thekmore protested. "Your fighters are not equipped for sustained engagement against those numbers." "Maybe not," Martinez acknowledged. "But we're equipped for something else." She pulled up the modified weapon specifications Rodriguez had been working on, along with Jackson's chaos algorithms and a dozen other innovations the humans had developed. "We're equipped to make them hurt." The plan that emerged from the meeting was tactically insane and strategically brilliant. The humans would lead a high-speed assault directly into the heart of the swarm formation, using their modified weapons and unpredictable tactics to create chaos and confusion. While the swarm entities were focused on the immediate threat, coalition forces would strike from multiple vectors, and rescue shuttles would evacuate survivors from the research station. It was the kind of plan that should have resulted in total annihilation for the assault force. Instead, it worked perfectly. The human fighters screamed out of the Eternal Vigilance's launch bays like avenging spirits, their crude projectile weapons chattering death as they dove into the swarm formation. But this time, their ammunition was different. Rodriguez's modified charges detonated inside swarm entities, flooding their nervous systems with synthetic toxins that sent them into convulsive death spirals. Jackson's chaos algorithms turned their fighter squadrons into instruments of pure unpredictability. They attacked from impossible angles, broke off engagements at random intervals, and coordinated in patterns that made no logical sense but somehow devastated swarm tactical responses. And when the first human fighter was destroyed by concentrated biocannon fire, something happened that I had never witnessed before. The remaining humans didn't mourn their fallen comrade or pause to reorganize. They got angry, not the hot, immediate anger of most species when faced with loss, but something much colder and more focused. Their attack patterns shifted from aggressive to absolutely merciless. They began targeting swarm entities not just for destruction, but for maximum suffering. I watched Rodriguez use his fighter's tractor beam to drag a wounded swarm hunter into the path of its own allies' weapons fire. I saw Jackson deliberately cripple a bioship's propulsion systems, leaving it helpless while she systematically destroyed its weapon clusters one by one. Another pilot actually used a damaged swarm entity as an improvised club, ramming it into two other creatures before detonating all three with a proximity charge. They weren't just fighting anymore. They were expressing their grief through violence, and the swarm was paying the price. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Kepler research station was secured. 2,847 coalition personnel had been successfully evacuated, and the swarm tendril had been completely eradicated. Human losses were lighter than projected, only 3 fighters destroyed, with 2 pilots recover alive. But as we regrouped and prepared for departure, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The humans had been holding back during their first engagement. This time, with their tactical innovations and modified weapons, with their chaos algorithms and improvised strategies, they hadn't just defeated the swarm. They had made it look easy. Impressive work, I told Captain Martinez as we watched the last rescue shuttles dock with the Eternal Vigilance. This was just a warm-up, she replied, and there was something in her voice that made me look at her more carefully. The swarm killed our people, hurt our friends. That kind of thing tends to motivate humans in ways other species find unsettling. What do you mean? She turned to face me, and in her eyes I saw something that triggered every predator warning instinct my species possessed. It was the look of something that had been pushed beyond its limits and decided to push back. I mean, we're not just going to fight the void swarm anymore, she said quietly. We're going to hunt it. Every tendril, every cluster, every last spawning node. We're going to find where it comes from, and we're going to burn it out of existence. That would require resources beyond anything the Coalition has ever attempted. The logistics alone, let us worry about the logistics. Her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. Humans are very good at logistics when we're properly motivated. As I watched her walk away, I realized that the galaxy's oldest and most experienced species had just encountered something completely outside their understanding. Humanity wasn't just another Coalition member species with useful tactical capabilities. They were a weapon that had been waiting their entire evolutionary history for a target worthy of their attention. And they had just found it 0.6 months after the Kepler station rescue. I began to understand what human determination truly meant. The Coalition High Command had been skeptical when Captain Martinez first proposed her hunting strategy. The idea of actively seeking out void swarm concentrations rather than responding to their attacks went against millennia of defensive doctrine. But the humans had presented compelling arguments backed by captured swarm biomatter and detailed tactical analyses. More importantly, they had volunteered to lead the effort themselves. What followed was the most rapid military expansion I had ever witnessed. Within weeks, human ships began arriving at Coalition staging areas. Not the crude fighters and transports we had grown accustomed to, but purpose-built warships designed specifically for anti-swarm operations. The first vessel to dock with our base station was designated the Retribution, and it looked like nothing in Coalition databases. Where most starships prioritized efficiency and multi-role capability, this craft had been designed with a single purpose: killing void swarm entities as effectively as possible. "It's beautiful," Rodriguez said as we watched it maneuver through the docking sequence. And I had to admit he was right. The ship moved with predatory grace, its hull studded with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays that gave it the appearance of a mechanical predator. "Ugly as hell," Jackson corrected with a grin, "but beautifully ugly. Like a shark made of battleship." When I was invited aboard for a tour, I discovered that the humans had been busy doing far more than just building new ships. They had been rethinking warfare from the ground up. The Retribution's captain was a grizzled man named Harrison, whose left arm had been replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic after what he called a disagreement with a swarm hunter's biocannon. He walked me through his ship with the pride of a craftsman showing off his masterwork. Standard Coalition design philosophy focuses on versatility, he explained as we toured the weapon base. Ships that can handle multiple mission types, modular components that could be reconfigured as needed. Very sensible for normal military operations. He gestured to the massive railgun installation that dominated the forward section. We threw sensible out the airlock. This baby does one thing perfectly. It puts tungsten projectiles through swarm bioarmor at 30% of light speed. No energy signatures to detect, no exotic particles to defend against. Just good old-fashioned kinetic energy applied with surgical precision. The tour continued through compartments filled with technological innovations I had never imagined. Automated fabrication units that could manufacture Rodriguez's modified munitions during combat. Advanced AI systems that implemented Jackson's chaos algorithms on a ship-wide scale. Medical bays equipped with experimental treatments for swarm biotoxins. But it was the crew that truly impressed me. These weren't the same enthusiastic newcomers who had joined our mission months earlier. They moved with the confidence of veterans, spoke in technical jargon that seamlessly blended multiple coalition languages, and displayed a level of tactical sophistication that rivaled species with centuries of spacefaring experience. "How did you advance so quickly?" I asked Captain Harrison as we concluded the tour. "Motivation," he replied simply. "When your species is threatened with extinction, you tend to learn fast or die trying. Humans chose to learn. But the technological development alone should have taken decades. The industrial capacity, the research, and development." Harrison's smile was grim. "You're thinking like a coalition species. Structured development, careful testing, bureaucratic approval processes. Humans don't work that way when we're angry." He led me to an observation deck where I could see the full scope of human activity around the base station. Dozens of ships moved in coordinated patterns, transferring personnel and supplies while new vessels arrived hourly. It looked like a military buildup that should have taken years to accomplish. When the swarm hit our first colony ship, Harrison continued, killing 30,000 civilians, including entire families, something changed in humanity. Every engineer started working on weapons technology. Every scientist began studying swarm biology. Every factory retooled for military production. Your entire species mobilized for war. Our entire species mobilized for extermination. His voice carried a coldness that made my combat instincts twitch. The Void Swarm made a fundamental error in judgment. It assumed we would react like other coalition species, defensively, cautiously, according to established protocols. Through the viewport, I watched a massive human vessel emerge from hyperspace, its hull scarred from recent combat, but its weapon systems clearly functional. According to the identification transponder, it was returning from a successful hunt in the Outer Rim territories. Instead, we reacted like humans. We took it personally. Over the following days, I witnessed the implementation of humanity's new military doctrine. Unlike coalition forces, which operated through careful planning and coordinated actions, human hunting groups functioned more like predatory packs. Their typical operation involved 3 to 5 ships working in concert to track down and eliminate swarm clusters. They would arrive at a target system, deploy sensor drones to map enemy positions, then coordinate simultaneous strikes from multiple vectors. But their tactics went far beyond simple destruction. I observed one such hunt from the bridge of the Retribution as Harrison's group engaged a medium-sized swarm concentration feeding on an abandoned mining facility. Instead of the methodical approach favored by coalition forces, the humans used what they called aggressive reconnaissance. "Target mapping complete," reported the tactical officer. 18 confirmed hostiles, including 1 capital-class devourer. "Defensive positions?" Harrison asked. "Standard dispersal pattern. They're using the mining facility's superstructure as cover while processing the metal infrastructure." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Classic mistake. They're thinking like scavengers instead of warriors." "Martinez, you're up." What followed challenged every assumption I held about space combat tactics. Instead of coordinating a careful assault, Harrison's group began what appeared to be random harassment attacks on the swarm perimeter. Single ships would dart in, deliver precise strikes against isolated targets, then withdraw before the swarm could mount an effective response. But there was nothing random about it. Each attack was calculated to force specific reactions from the swarm entities, driving them into defensive positions that gradually compromised their overall formation. Within an hour, the tightly organized cluster had been maneuvered into a chaotic sprawl that left individual entities vulnerable to concentrated fire. "Now we finish it," Harrison said quietly, and the real attack began. The human ships moved like a coordinated organism, each vessel targeting specific threats while providing cover for their companions. Their modified weapons systems proved devastatingly effective. Rodriguez's neurotoxin charges turned swarm bioships into convulsing wrecks, while Jackson's chaos algorithms allowed human fighters to weave through defensive fire with impossible precision. The engagement lasted 37 minutes. When it ended, not a single swarm entity remained operational. "Textbook hunt," Harrison observed with satisfaction. "No casualties, minimal ammunition expenditure, complete target elimination." I stared at the debris field where 18 swarm entities had been systematically destroyed. "This was routine for you." "Standard operation. We've conducted over 200 similar hunts in the past 4 months." Harrison's casual tone made the achievement even more remarkable. The swarm is learning to fear human ship signatures. They've started avoiding systems where our hunting groups operate. This revelation staggered me. In 3 centuries of coalition operations, I had never heard of void swarm entities displaying anything resembling fear. They were driven by pure hunger, consuming everything in their path without regard for tactical considerations. The idea that they might actually retreat from human forces suggested something fundamental had changed in the war's dynamics. How is that possible? The swarm doesn't experience fear in any conventional sense. No, Harrison agreed, but it does experience learning. And what it's learned is that attacking human targets results in disproportionate retaliation. We don't just defend our territory. We track down and eliminate any swarm presence that threatens our people. He activated a holographic display showing coalition space with markers indicating recent human hunting operations. The scope of their activities was staggering. Human forces had engaged swarm entities across dozens of star systems, often in regions where coalition forces had never operated. "You're hunting them outside coalition territory? We're hunting them everywhere." The swarm doesn't recognize political boundaries, so neither do we. Harrison's expression hardened. Every swarm entity that exists is a potential threat to human lives. That makes them legitimate targets regardless of where they're found. This philosophy represented a radical departure from coalition doctrine. Most member species focused on defending their own territory while contributing to joint operations as needed. The idea of conducting independent military operations across the galaxy was almost unprecedented. The Coalition Council must have concerns about unauthorized operations in neutral space. "The Coalition Council can file a complaint after we've finished exterminating the swarm," Harrison replied bluntly. "Some things are more important than bureaucratic protocols." That evening, I found myself in the Retribution's recreation area, sharing drinks with human crew members and listening to their stories. What I heard painted a picture of a species that had transformed itself in response to an existential threat. Chief Engineer Paula Santos described how her hometown on New Terra had been evacuated when swarm scouts were detected in the system. "My daughter asked me why the monsters wanted to hurt people," she said quietly. I couldn't give her an answer that made sense, so I decided to make sure she'd never have to ask that question again. Santos had joined the Military Engineering Corps and contributed to the development of several major weapon systems. Her innovations had saved countless lives during hunting operations, but she spoke about her work with the matter-of-fact tone of someone doing necessary maintenance. "It's not about glory or heroism," she continued. "It's about making sure my kid grows up in a galaxy where the swarm is just a historical footnote." Similar stories emerged from every crew member I spoke with. Humans who had abandoned civilian careers to join hunting groups. Scientists who had redirected their research toward anti-swarm technologies. Entire families who had enlisted together to contribute to the war effort. But it was Rodriguez who provided the most insight into human psychology. The thing you have to understand about humans, he said, his scarred hands gesturing as he spoke, is that we're wired for revenge. Not just individual revenge, but species-level revenge. When something threatens our survival, we don't just fight back. We make sure it never threatens us again. That seems extreme. Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. Extreme? The swarm wants to devour every living thing in the galaxy. They've already consumed billions of sentient beings from countless species. They represent the complete negation of everything we consider valuable about existence. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. You want to know what's extreme? Extreme is sitting back and responding defensively while something like that spreads across the stars. Extreme is treating this like a normal military conflict instead of an extinction event. But your species has only been spacefaring for decades. The swarm has existed for eons. How can you be certain your efforts will succeed? Because we're not just fighting to win, Rodriguez replied. We're fighting to survive. And humans are very, very good at surviving. As the weeks passed, I continued to observe human military operations with growing amazement and unease. Their success rate against swarm forces was unprecedented, but their methods often seemed to violate the basic principles of civilized warfare. They showed no interest in capturing swarm entities for study. They made no attempts at communication or negotiation. When they encountered swarm forces, they destroyed them completely and moved on to the next target. It's genocide, I finally said to Captain Martinez during one of our regular briefings. Yes, she replied without hesitation. It is. Her casual acknowledgement stunned me. Doesn't that concern you? The coalition was founded on principles of peaceful coexistence and diplomatic resolution of conflicts. The coalition was founded by species that had the luxury of reasoning with their enemies, Martinez corrected. The Void Swarm isn't an enemy in any conventional sense. It's a cosmic plague. You don't negotiate with cancer, you cut out. But the moral implications of allowing a force of pure consumption to devour the galaxy. Martinez's voice hardened. What's the moral weight of every species the swarm has already destroyed? What's the ethical cost of every civilization that will fall if we don't stop them? She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet conducting exercises in preparation for their next hunting expedition. I've seen the records, Vextera. Hundreds of species that tried to coexist with the swarm, tried to find peaceful solutions, tried to limit themselves to defensive measures. Want to know how many of them still exist? I remained silent. 0. The swarm consumed them all, turned them into biomass to fuel its expansion. She turned back to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my predator instinct scream warnings. Humans learn from their mistakes. We're not making the same choice. And if you're wrong, if your campaign of extermination makes you into something as monstrous as the swarm itself. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Then, we'll deal with that problem when it arises, she said finally. But right now, the only thing standing between the Void Swarm and the complete consumption of galactic civilization is human determination to see them extinct. That's a terrible burden for one species to carry. Yes, she agreed. It is. But somebody has to carry it. As I left the meeting, I realized that my initial assessment of humanity had been completely wrong. I had thought they were broken because they fought like they had nothing to lose. The truth was far more disturbing. They fought like they had everything to protect, and they were willing to become monsters to do it.